Hey, and welcome to today's lessons. Today, I'm going to teach you all about family members claiming on an insured's record. Here we go. So, who qualifies on someone's record? Well, the first is minor children, spouses, and divorced spouses, and in some case, parents. Yes, that is right. Sometimes your parents may actually qualify on your record, and most people don't even know that. So the very first entitlement is children and disabled adult child benefits. When someone is approved for disability or retirement, one of the very first questions on their actual application is whether they have any minor children under the age of 18, any children who are over 18 but under 19 and still in high school, or if they have any disabled adult child that has been disabled before the age of 22. The next is a spouse. Now, some people think that a spouse has to be 62 to file on someone's record or a widower, and that is simply not true. There's actually other instances where I'm going to teach you today how younger spouses can qualify on someone else's record. And then the next one is a divorced spouse. And most of us are aware that there has to be a 10-year marriage, not 9 years and 10 months and 15 days, 10 years to claim on that divorce record. So for the children's benefits, the very first one, a minor child under the age of 16, as long as they're a biological or adopted child, qualifies on this record. But that age actually qualifies somebody else on this record. So if that minor child under the age of 16 has a parent who's married to the person who's insured, the number holder is who we call them, then that parent can qualify on this record under child in care policy, whether the number holder is alive or deceased. So it's called child in care or mother's father's benefits. And when the child turns 16, that entitlement does disappear if that parent is not of retirement age. So this is one instance where a 40-year-old mother or 40-year-old father who's married to the number holder has a child in care under the age of 16, whether they live in the same household or not, can qualify on that record. So if there was 4 children, they would divide that 3398. Same where if there was 3 children and a parent receive a mother's or father's benefits. And so sometimes if there's like 2 children plus a parent, sometimes it's just more beneficial to let the children collect all the benefits if the parent's working. It's always a case by case. It depends on, how old the children are. If one's going to be turning 18 soon, if there's a 3-year-old where that mother or father might receive benefits until that child is 16. So there's different scenarios where the caseworker, claim specialist will tell them the most beneficial way to file. And somebody could be technically entitled but not actually get a monetary benefit if there's not enough money on that record. I've seen records where there's 10, 12 children and they're all receiving a smaller amount because there's so many children dividing that family maximum. Now, biological children or adopted children under the age of 18 or 19 and 2 months qualify for regular children's benefits. However, there's another policy called stepchild benefits, where a stepchild who is receiving 50% or more of their care from the insured number holder, whether they're disabled or retired, can qualify on that record. Guess what? Let me show you. So this policy in Social Security's Program Operations Manual System, where all policies are housed, if you type into Google, for example, stepchild relationship, now there is a 2-year period described that doesn't apply to benefits on the grandparents, the number holder's record, when a grandchild of the number holder is adopted by the number holder's spouse. So this is the policy, and they also have to meet the dependency. A child who meets the requirements must also have lived with the number holder in the United States and received 1/2 support from the number holder throughout the entire year before the month of which the number holder became entitled to retirement, disability, or died. So you can't file for retirement and then go get your grandkids and start claiming them. You can't do that. They have to be in your household a year before and also meet the requirements up here of their parents have to be deceased or disabled. And then they have the throughout the year policies. But this is a brand new policy and didn't exist before. Brand new, hot off the press. You're learning about it here. Many people think that benefits end at the age of 18 simply because of age. However, that's not the case. Social Security's recognize that many students don't finish high school before they turn 18. And so they have a policy where if the student is still enrolled in high school full time, high school, not college, high school, they can collect benefits until the age of 19 and 2 months or graduation, whichever one comes first. So this is a good policy to help students who maybe turn 18 later on the year, or maybe they were delayed in graduation. So this policy, who is eligible for student benefits? First, they must meet the requirement as a child benefit, attained age 18, full-time attendance, attending an educational grade 12 or below. They can get up to 19 and 2 months. They have to not be being paid by their employer, and they cannot be a prisoner. And they have to actually attend full time. So they can't go part time. So there's another policy I had to do where I had to determine if the child was full time. Finally, our next policy is disabled adult children. It's where someone who is disabled before the age of 22 can qualify and stay on a parent's record indefinitely as long as they meet the requirements of being disabled and unmarried and not making over substantial gainful activity, which is the main requirement of being disabled. So this is often found in families where there's a child who maybe has been disabled since birth. Usually that's common in children who were born with cerebral palsy, Down syndrome, intellectual disabilities like autism. I personally have a disabled adult child sister. She's been disabled, she was approved at age 19. She's always had a learning disability, but because she was receiving her stepchild benefits, that was over the amount of SSI disability, so she didn't get that. But she received stepchild benefits, and then she received student benefits on my dad's record, and then she was qualified as a disabled adult child. So your disabled adult children, they don't have to be 22 or before when they apply. A lot of times, someone doesn't apply right away. Maybe they don't have anybody to help them, or they're receiving SSI, supplemental security income. A parent is old enough or entitled to retirement or disability. So often this happens where someone is disabled before the age of 22, but the person that they're going to end up claiming on is not retirement age yet or disabled. So let's think about this. If someone is 20 years old and their parent is only 40, 45, that parent is too young for retirement. So if that parent is not disabled, they're going to have to wait until that parent is 62. If they file at age 62, early retirement or full retirement, they have to wait until that parent is entitled to a benefit and receiving a benefit to qualify in that record. So many times in the disabled community, somebody is receiving SSI only until their parent actually files for retirement or disability and gets awarded. So a lot of times on every application, it asks that question, do you have any children who were disabled before age 22? Even if the child is over 22 already, they might be 65 with a 45-year-old disabled adult child who has autism or Down syndrome, or maybe has just always been disabled for whatever reason. They need to say yes, because when I worked at Social Security, a lot of times I would find what they call missed entitlements. And a missed entitlement is when nobody told us that this person had an insured relative, like a mom or dad, usually because their parent wasn't entitled when they filed for disability, and maybe they didn't live with them, so nobody knew to file. Happens so much, especially later on when someone's 65, 67 and filing, and they forget, yeah, I have a 35-year-old that maybe lives in a group home, or maybe they're estranged and somebody else is taking care of them, or maybe they're living on their own, and nobody knows that that 35-year-old who's receiving SSI should be entitled on this person's record, because the way Social Security records work is not how most Americans think it works. The records are not tied to each other. So my record is not tied to my parents' record. I have to tell them my parents' name, date of birth, place of birth, and then they have to query the record to find their record if I don't have their social. Their records are not tied to each other. So there's so many missed entitlements because people skip the question or don't think about the question thoroughly, and or maybe the parent is deceased before they turn 65 and nobody knows about it. So unfortunately it happens pretty often, especially with disabled adult children who have intellectual disabilities and they can't advocate for themselves. So I'm always on the lookout for this, especially when I have someone who can't advocate for himself. I'm always asking them, what day do you get your check? And if they're telling me they only get a check on the first, I'm asking them about their parents. And even if they were adopted, their adoptive parents, because they can qualify an adopted parent's record. But this is how you can help somebody qualify for all of their entitlements. So I already let the cat out of the bag a little earlier, but the benefit titled Mother's Father's Benefits or Child and Care Benefits, one is for alive and one is for survivors. For mothers and fathers benefits, the requirement is to be the widower of a number holder who died fully or currently insured, have child and care of the deceased number holder, and who's entitled to children's entitlement benefits, regardless of age of the widower. So if let's say I was married at 40 and my spouse is 40, and we have, let's say, a 10-year-old, that my widower can file and claim mother's father's benefits as long as they're under the early retirement test, and not making over that amount. They can also, if I'm alive, let's say I'm disabled or retired, they can get that child and care spouse benefits as long as the child's under age 16. Mother's father's is for a deceased number holder's widower who has in care an entitled child of the number holder. The claimant must be the widower of the number holder who died fully or currently insured, not be married for conditions on which remarriage is not a bar to entitlement, have filed an application, not be entitled to widower's insurance benefits, so not be over the age of 60, not be entitled to retirement benefits equal to or exceeding the amount of the unadjusted mother's father's benefits. So if they're entitled to more money on their own record, then they wouldn't be entitled to this. And then have a child in care of the deceased who's entitled to child insurance benefits. So most people are aware that you can file for retirement as early as age 62 on a current spouse's record. However, that current spouse has to actually file. You cannot file on a current spouse's record if they don't file. You can't collect a monetary amount. Now, if you are 65 and they are 62, you can get Medicare on their record regardless if they filed or not. You cannot collect a monetary check on a current spouse's record if they have not filed. So when you file at 62, you actually take a reduced amount. So if you file on your own record at age 62, it's reduced from full retirement age. The calculation is different because on a spouse's record, you only get up to 50% at full retirement age. If the spouse is 62 to full retirement age and they have a child in care, it's not reduced. Benefits are not reduced for any month in which they have an entitled child in care. So a child of the number holder under the age of 16, if that 62-year-old has a 14-year-old in their care, the benefits are not reduced. This happens a lot, especially now that people are having children later in life. Like my parents, my sister was 18 and my parents were turning 62. This happens a lot. So benefits don't have to be reduced. That's why it's very critical to answer those questions. Divorced spouse age 62 to fraud, the child can be entitled on any earnings record. Same thing with survivor's benefits. So always a special policy. Leave it to Social Security to have a policy for every situation. So the next type of benefit on a number holder's record is a disabled widow's benefit. And this is for someone who is between the age of 50 and 59, so they're not 60 yet to collect regular widow's benefits, and they were married for at least 9 months before the number holder passed, and they did not remarry before the age of 50, and they qualify under Social Security's disability rules. So they can qualify on the number holder, the deceased number holder's record, as a disabled widower, even if they weren't insured on their own record. This is one of the only times, other than a disabled adult child, that you can get disability on as someone else's record, age 50 to 59. So this is the policy. You know, I'm always coming with the policy for the requirements for disabled widows benefits. First, they have to attain the age of 50. Second, they have to prove the relationship with the deceased. They have to prove that they were married for 9 months or longer. They have to prove their disability. And they have to be found disabled before the end of a prescribed period. Tongue twister there. So to qualify for disability benefits, the widower, including certain divorced spouses, so you can be a divorced widower too, must be found disabled before the end of a certain prescribed period as defined by law. The widower may allege a disability onset that is earlier than the prescribed period. However, they have to be disabled within that time period before the prescribed period end date. They have to file an application. They have to complete a disability report. When the claimant is a widow, their age is the first one, and whether the claimant is entitled or not entitled at the time of marriage. So for a regular disabled widow or a disabled surviving divorced spouse, you can disregard the remarriage of a claimant at least age 50 but not age 60, applying as a disabled widow or a disabled surviving spouse if the remarriage occurred after the attainment of 50 and they were disabled at the time of remarriage. The remarriage of a person already entitled as a disabled widow at the time of the remarriage can be deemed not to have occurred for purposes of period of disability subsequent to one in the marriage in which the marriage took place. The remarriage of a claimant who remarries between age 50 and 60 and files for disabled widows or disabled surviving divorced spouse benefits after attaining age 60 will be disregarded if the claimant was entitled to disabled widowers, or disabled surviving disabled spouses at the time of remarriage. Or, more common one is you can disregard the marriage of a claimant applying for benefits as a widower or surviving divorced spouse age 60 or over if the remarriage occurred after the attainment of age 60, or age 50 and the claimant was entitled to benefits as a disabled widower or surviving divorced wife or surviving divorced husband at the time of remarriage. And then an example is the person who's attained a particular age on the first moment of the day preceding the anniversary of their birth. The widower whose date of birth is March 16th, they attain the age the previous day. So let's say my mom, she can remarry because she's now 70 and she can still file if one of her previous husbands was to pass away. So this is to make sure that someone has the benefit of filing on any record they might be more entitled to. And so this actually, you know, can help people, especially people who find love later in life. They can always file. If my mom was to remarry after 9 months, if her new husband's 50% is over hers, she could qualify in his. But a lot of times the survivor amount might be more than a widower's benefit. And so that's why I always ask somebody, have they ever been married? And even if they're not currently entitled as a divorced spouse on that record, because maybe the 50% is not more than their 100%, but a lot of times the widower benefits is. And so I always tell them, you know, make sure you call and see if, check on that record, keep in contact with the family. And if there's an obituary that you find file on that record and see if you get more money. It's an entitlement that, that was worked and paid into. You might as well benefit from it. You're not taking it from anybody, because it just goes poof into the outer space if no one else uses it. And oftentimes that divorced widower or is, one of the last next of kins, so they might as well benefit from it. And for many programs, especially needs-based programs, they have to file for any entitlement they might be qualified for. So always make sure you refer people to Social Security if you think someone might benefit on a widower's record, even if they had remarried. One of the last benefits I'm going to talk about today for family benefits is parents' benefit. And this is a pretty uncommon, unknown policy that I don't see very often, simply probably because it's not well known. But here's the policy. Let's go. So first, a parent has to be at least 62, and the parent has to be receiving at least 1/2 of their support from the deceased worker at the time of death or the beginning of the deceased worker's disability. So they can qualify on a disability record too. They don't have to be a survivor. The parent has to provide timely documents that prove the deceased worker was providing at least 1/2 their support. And a parent is not entitled to Social Security retirement benefits equal or exceeding the parent's new benefits. The parent is the natural parent of the deceased worker, or the step parent or adopted parent of the deceased worker who's reached the age of 16. The parent has not remarried after the worker's death, and the deceased worker had enough work credits. They also have to be a U.S. citizen or have legal status here in the United States. So this could possibly be, let's say I'm taking care of my mom, and my mom's Social Security is not a lot, and I'm providing her with more than what she's getting. That would probably show that I was providing more than half of her support. This also could be a policy where someone brings their parents from another country and they didn't have a lot of work earnings here in the United States, or maybe they were uninsured here in the United States, and they become disabled or deceased. Their parents could get their benefits here as long as they have the proper legal status here. It's not a policy that I saw claimed a whole lot when I worked at Social Security, but it does exist, and it's out there to protect, make sure the family's financial future is secured, especially if someone was providing for their parents, especially if their parents they have to be over 62 if their parents were lower income earners, like in the case where I always saw, parents, foreign parents coming over because the children got their parents approved for legal status, and they usually didn't have a lot of work here. And we see this a lot in the Medicare industry, where someone may not have 40 credits yet. This is one of those situations where if their child had insurability here and they passed away or became disabled, that the parents could qualify on their record. I hope today's lesson was very valuable and insightful for you. I'll see you next week.